Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Put down that Delta 8. Chicago City Council votes to ban the sale of intoxicating hemp products with a few exceptions.
What makes eating illegal and drinking legal?
Alderpeople pass a ban with carve-outs for beverages, topical creams, and pet products, but will Mayor Brandon Johnson veto it?
We make a clear distinction between, individuals who are gathering for pleasure and those who are interested in causing harm.
The mayor helps negotiate a compromise curfew plan aimed at preventing large gatherings of teens, but no vote on the measure just yet.
In one breath, they talk about lowering cost. In the next, they pass expensive, damaging policies that hit Illinois families.
Illinois lawmakers return to Springfield with an eye on affordability, though how to make that happen depends on which side of the aisle you talk to. Meantime, the state investigates whether the landlord tipped off immigration agents to raid a South Shore apartment building. Federal prosecutors fumble after a jury swiftly acquits a man accused of putting a hit out on Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino. And schools out all over Chicagoland as 30 below wind chills send everyone scurrying inside. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Michael Liptrot of Block Club Chicago, Alice Yin of the Chicago Tribune, Robert Herguth of the Chicago Sun-Times, and Patrick Fingston of the political blog The Illinois. Thank you all for being here. As always, lots to talk about, so let's get right to it. Patrick, this alleged murder for hire trial, the man accused of trying to take out Greg Bovino, it was here and gone in a flash. Were you surprised to see it move so quickly?
Remember when it used to matter when the federal government indicted you on something?
Right.
That it was almost a guarantee that you were going to get convicted and sent to prison? Not so much under the current Justice Department. This was a shoddy case put together in a shoddy way, presented terribly, clearly led by the Justice Department and not so much by the local prosecutors. It was a mess top to bottom.
I mean, how about that, Bob? The feds used to have this very daunting win rate. So far in all these kind of ancillary cases, non-immigration related cases, they're striking out. I mean, is perhaps in some ways too an indication of public sentiment opposed to the Trump administration's enforcement blitz, that grand juries and juries themselves are not buying it.
Yeah, I think so. I think people are seeing through what some of these are, that it's perhaps politics and it's theater. I can't really speak specifically to this case. I wasn't in the courtroom, but I did hear our federal court reporter at the Sun-Times talk about this actually earlier today, and talking about the conviction rate is almost perfect before this whole wave of, and not just this case, but a lot of others too. Yeah,
which you have to imagine is going to be sort of demoralizing to a lot of these line prosecutors who've made this their career. Michael, another high-profile story that came out of Midway Blitz, that raid on a South Shore apartment building. Now there's an investigation into whether the landlord might have tipped off the feds. What are the details there?
So the Illinois Department of Human Rights is looking into a discrimination, filed discrimination charges against and doing an investigation into this raid, and essentially saying that the landlord, which had a track record that was kind of shoddy, potentially tipped off the federal government in terms of that raid. And when looking at the people in the units that were targeted, because you had U.S. citizens as well as immigrants staying at this complex, and looking at the pattern that ICE agents took, and then also in conjunction with this case, looking at the separate case, trying to get the files and the video footage from this raid. Just like you were saying earlier, by the end of it all, everyone involved in Operation Midway Blitz is going to be in court for something. And I think that Governor Pritzker has spoken out about this, and you have a lot of lawmakers speaking out in terms of how this raid was potentially used as more or less propaganda and theater in that way in the videos and other promotion that came out of it.
Yeah, as I recall, there was reporting that the agents went in and had sort of a map of the building, looking at all the different apartment units. So clearly some inside information.
Yeah, from the start, I mean, I think our reporters were in there, and I believe one of them actually found like a handwritten, kind of drawing, so somebody, gave them direction, and that was a suspicion from the start. And the landlord, when we talk about the landlord, there's the building owner, then there's also the building manager, right? Two different groups, and both of them have been, to my knowledge, pretty mum for since it's happened about, well, did you help or not?
Yeah. And it can't be understated just how big of an impact this has had on the residents. Not only, you know, following this raid, just with everything going on at the complex, all of the residents having to leave the complex. And earlier, it was reported that one of the residents that left, her name's Samantha Stamps, a 56-year-old, was reported missing and last seen living at the Central Pink Line stop. And so this has real impacts on people. And if it comes out that this landlord, you know, had a hand in this raid leading to these people not having a home, and now you have people missing and not accounted for, all stemming from this and Operation Midway Blitz. There's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot to dive into and investigate.
It's certainly untoward, and it's pretty clear that these are not particularly great people that were running this place. But I don't know that there's a Department of Human Rights investigation that has a lot of teeth to it, or if any laws were broken here. I mean, then the Attorney General theoretically would be involved in this. So I don't know that much is actually to come of this, especially when you've got the Department of Human Rights breathing down your neck.
Yeah, it could be an instance of, you know, the state sort of taking a stand in this instant, you know, as they've tried to do against Midway Blitz. But to your point, whether anything comes of it or not, it may just be an effort to shine more light.
Especially just thinking about in terms of this level of immigration enforcement. Some of this we don't even have a precedent for in terms of what are the consequences, or are there consequences for tipping off immigration enforcement to raid a building.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what comes of this.
Well, and also just one other thing, just the way it was raided. I mean, I believe people were rappelling from helicopters.
Yes.
Right. I mean, and just
style.
I've never ever seen that.
Right.
Yeah, well, Alice, we mentioned this right at the top. City Council voting this week to ban most hemp products. This has been a long-running debate, but there are some exceptions for things like beverages. What do we know about Mayor Johnson's thinking on the ban?
Yeah, so when Mayor Johnson first introduced his 2026 budget, hemp was part of his plan to close the deficit, but then the federal government kind of preempted him, although that ban doesn't really go into place until November 2026 of this year. So there is some time in the middle, a limbo, if you will, for the city to, you know, do its own thing to maybe tax or regulate hemp, which is what his administration called for. But, you know, a majority of aldermen, again, went over his wishes and passed this ban, not a veto-proof majority, but only a couple below, and the mayor has not indicated he will veto it, but time will tell. I think there have been some, you know, text campaigns going on today saying,
I got one today.
Yeah, urge Mayor Johnson to veto this. So we'll see what he decides.
Yeah, and it's I mean, you have to wonder, with that federal ban going into place, is this the kind of thing that will they be, you know, really doing a crackdown effort, or will it be sort of like when medical marijuana and recreational marijuana expanded to the states, and, you know, the technically still a Schedule I drug, but the feds haven't gone after it. It's going to be, you know, sort of a messy legal area. You know, Patrick, the states looked at hemp regulation multiple times, but they've kind of punted on this in the General Assembly.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody talk about this on the State House radar since it completely, the governor's effort to ban Delta 8 fell apart last year, or I guess it would have been late 2024, and you know, it was an ugly scene in Springfield where some House Democrats shouted the governor's staff out of the caucus room, and staffer left in tears, and there were a lot of hurt feelings and mad people about it, and essentially, and this is weird to say considering the political dynamic, the Republican Congress and Donald Trump have sort of bailed the governor out on this one, because they're sort of doing what he was trying to do anyway, without him having to expend political capital in the state to do it.
Yeah, very strange bedfellows on
Weird,
that
right?
All right, Alice, another piece of council news. They haven't voted on it yet, but there is the latest in a long series of curfew proposals aimed at curbing these large gatherings of teens. What does this one entail?
Yeah, so third time's not the charm, I guess. Yeah, we expected City Council to vote on a third version proposed by the downtown alderman, Brian Hopkins. We came in expecting the legislation to be the version where the superintendent would have a 12-hour notice to implement a curfew, but at the last minute, Hopkins introduced a substitute ordinance that would just give CPD the power to detain juveniles violating a curfew until their parents could come. And that actually got pushed back from other moderate and conservative aldermen, including Matt O'Shea, who thought that this is not an effective way to go about stopping these teen gatherings. So the vote got pulled, and remains to be seen what's next.
And there was some back and forth as well from, what I saw the mayor's comments afterwards, where they were discussing kind of taking these dispersal orders that are now CPD policy and trying to put those in there as well, so that it's kind of codified within the city code, correct?
Yeah.
So what's the thinking there in terms of it going a step beyond policy, do we know?
Yeah, so Chicago already has a curfew that is in place at 10 p.m. for kids 17 and younger. And CPD does have the authority to issue a dispersal for mass gatherings and curfew violations. But what Hopkins proposed added some, I guess, more constitutional concerns from some aldermen over how long police were allowed to just detain kids for violating a curfew.
Yeah, and that issue of constitutionality, that's one they've been debating throughout this entire process, right?
Right, especially when you think about the snap curfews, the idea of snap curfews, and then the constitutionality. Beyond that, some people looking at some of the means that are done, especially with the idea of being able to enforce, have a curfew and enforce it within 30 minutes. And then now with ride shares, being able to have geofencing when it comes to Uber and Lyft, being able to shut down certain areas where people can't go in and out. It definitely would raise some questions for people of like, are we infringing on those constitutional rights?
Yeah.
I think we should talk about the PR of this, right? And listen, I'm an elder millennial suburban dad. I am not somebody that's,
not that there's anything wrong with that.
I'm not somebody that's hanging out on Michigan Avenue at 3 in the morning. But there is clearly a public perception here that these large crowds of young people that are loud and have sometimes caused trouble are an issue and are part of this public safety PR problem that the city has. And it's just another in a long list of issues where Brandon Johnson is just completely out of touch with the majority of people who are looking at this environment and these things that are happening. And he says, no, we're all good with where we're at. Because, and listen, again, elder millennial suburban dad, not a young black man, no idea how the situations relate. But I think if you look at the public perception of what's going on, he's completely out of touch.
Well, and certainly plenty of alders have, across the city council have had very different opinions than the mayor on this issue, over the course of the debate, fair to say?
Yeah, and I will say with the PR aspect, if you look at a lot of the details of the teen trends that have made the news in downtown, some of them have happened, during times where this curfew ordinance would not have actually made a difference. So it is kind of an optics thing. Like if you think about other cities like New York, I've never seen an image like that in Times Square,
right.
And people would probably be outraged there. But also in Chicago, these teen trends happen on the south and west sides too. I saw them all the time when I was an overnight reporter, and they also did lead to violence and death.
Yeah, obviously downtown gets a lot of attention. Nobody's going to Times Square because it's not cool anymore. That's why. That's the real reason.
That's something big when you think about, as you said, on the south and west sides, you have these same issues. But as Patrick brought up earlier, the PR of it, because Austin had a teen trend on a couple blocks. You had a couple thousand teens, shootings, some cases that I followed in court. But it doesn't get national attention. Mm-hmm. But when you think about, I believe it was last year or year before, there was a young couple downtown in the middle of a teen trend, and some people got attacked, and that was everywhere.
Yep.
And I think that balance of figuring out how to govern or at least reel these in with still acknowledging, and I see what Brandon Johnson's trying to do as far as acknowledging and balancing, the intrinsic value and the rights of the teens, but still very much from a governance perspective, something needing to change.
Yeah, every mayor's got to pay more attention to downtown than perhaps it deserves.
Right,
Chicago's often the case.
Chicago's in a unique place, especially when you have the president putting a magnifying glass on the city in that way.
On the Miracle Mile, as he calls it.
Yeah, well, I think he was thinking of the Billy Joel song. I will stick with that. All right, Bob, the city's inspector general was out this week with a report that there was $26.5 million in overtime paid out over 4 years to employees who aren't eligible for overtime.
Yep.
Of course, within the scope of a multi-billion-dollar budget, that's maybe not a drop in the bucket, but it's not going to make or break the city. But, with the huge budget struggles that Chicago is facing, talking about optics again, how bad of a look is that?
Yeah, I think it is a bad look. Although, again, not defending Brandon Johnson, but my understanding is this does stretch back to the previous regime, Lori Lightfoot, before Johnson was in office. So it's a several-year look, it's a lot of money, but yes, when you're talking about billions, it is a relative drop in the bucket. I mean, I would say that, I mean, it obviously hints at some mismanagement and poor, bureaucracy. But also, I think that one of the things, one of my colleagues had written a story about all the uncollected debt in the city.
Right.
And, you're talking about, yes, every dollar counts, but if you're looking at big dollars and something, when we're talking about tax increases, we're talking about cuts and blah, 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 as we seem to always be a couple times a year, when budget season is contemplated, I mean, there's billions of dollars in uncollected debt out there that could plug a lot of these holes too. So if you're talking money, I mean, this is just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I think it's also, it goes to a larger issue of trust. Brandon Johnson wants to enact a sweeping progressive agenda. He wants to tax the rich. He wants to build up all these programs. Taxpayers and constituents will be less, inclined to vote and approve those measures if they don't trust the government to handle the money correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are no consequences, seemingly, right? There's the stack of issues that have arisen over the years. The CTA employees who were essentially, being ghost payrolled as coin counters and, working from home and doing nothing, and the state and city employees that took advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program loans, and almost nobody's being prosecuted. So at what point is there any consequence that the public can have some faith restored in stopping the government or government employees from doing wrong?
All right, well, speaking of something else that the public hated, Alice, one of the city's most infamous maneuvers was back in the spotlight, with the city reportedly considering buying back the parking meters that got sold off under former Mayor Richard M. Daley. But we heard this week the mayor ultimately decided it wasn't worth it, just too costly of an idea there.
Yeah, so that was a fun 4 days. News first broke like late Friday evening that the Johnson administration was in talks about possibly buying back the city's parking meters. And he ultimately, revealed on Tuesday that the price was too high to pay and that the city would have to, finance the entire deal for decades via debt, which makes, which boxes them in terms of having to, raise rates and keep the meters online later. So. False alarm, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one of the most hated deals, but you have to imagine if it's a $3 billion price tag, no matter how much Chicagoans want those meters back, people might have just revolted at that.
Right. Strategically, it's a very tough politically for this current administration, just when talking about the overtime conundrum, when it comes to parking meter deal and all this
other.
The
head tax, that was the main issue, the budget, $100 million.
There's so many different things that could plug holes, but we've kind of painted ourselves in a bunch of different corners when it comes to just the way to get out of it. And I could only imagine it's a lot of strategists and financial and political strategists really scratching their heads right now.
And I would just add also that this is a daily legacy issue. I mean, that people forget, it's like, oh, we have to confront this. It's like, well, how did it happen to begin with? I mean, when Mayor Daley, the second Mayor Daley, was in office and left office, he left a system in many ways. I mean, sure, downtown was beautiful, blah, 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 but a lot of problems that now we are having to contend with as a city and a state and a region.
And not for lack of trying. Citizens even did that class action lawsuit claiming it violated anti-monopoly laws, but the courts ruled that was not the jurisdiction.
They took a swing.
Yeah, this is nephew's company that, former mayor's nephew's company that handled the deal.
Indeed. Well, that's the Chicago way, isn't it? All right, Patrick, state lawmakers back in Springfield this week. The message of affordability just positively reverberating through the rotunda. What are you going to be watching for in this spring session?
Well, I wrote a column about this morning, that it's obvious that the Democrats who run the legislature are laser focused on the cost of living and affordability. And they're right to be. That's the number one issue in polling. Everyone, top to bottom, understands that and is with them. But the problem is actually addressing those issues is really expensive and really tough to do, right? Trying to reduce property taxes, you've got to shift billions into schools, which would mean cutting other programs or raising other taxes. They've bungled the gasoline tax or the grocery tax mess. They've already held back the gasoline tax inflation adjustment this year. So there are just few issues for them to actually be able to bring down the cost of living coming. So if they're not able to do it during the spring legislative session, it opens them up politically in the fall. And if Republicans have any capabilities about them politically, which is in question, they can absolutely smack Democrats around on this, and they could be vulnerable coming toward the election.
Well, especially if the millionaire's tax, which, you know, the House Speaker Chris Welch has indicated he wants Illinois to make another go at, which would require a voter referendum. But, you know, J.B. Pritzker, he went for that in 2020. He lost, you know, by a little bit.
Graduated tax.
Graduated
2020.
tax, yeah.
This is the Pat Quinn millionaire surcharge.
Yeah. But it would still require a voter referendum.
Yeah.
And in November, a midterm year, and if he has presidential ambitions, I don't know if he wants to be a two-time, you know, loser on that.
Well, and we're trying to move up the Illinois primary, which is perhaps an indication of a certain governor's ambitions for the White House. But I mean, you know, this idea of affordability, is this Dems kind of learning the 2024 lesson a little bit too late, perhaps?
They've certainly gotten the message, right? Nationally, cost of living is what killed Kamala Harris, right? And it would have killed her here if there wasn't just such a built-in advantage for Democrats and a built-in disadvantage for Donald Trump, right? She underperformed Joe Biden in Illinois by 400,000 votes from 2024 to 2020. That's real numbers. That's reason legislative races didn't change, congressional races didn't change. So they see the writing on the wall that they've got to fix some of these national message, some of these structural issues, so that they don't have problems, even with all of the issues Republicans have top to bottom, from Donald Trump to the grassroots in this state. I think Democrats see that they at least need to message affordability better, but they've also got to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. Well, Bob, you had a great piece this week on a huge surge in video gambling burglaries. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So if you recall a little history, I mean, video gambling was not legal in Illinois until, you know, about 15 years ago. And and basically the municipalities get to decide if they want it in their town or not. The city of Chicago, it's not allowed video gambling at this very moment, but a lot of the suburbs have it. And there has been an absolute soar in the number of break-ins and thefts, and there have been some armed robberies too. And some of the burglaries, the burglars were armed as well. So the numbers are like literally off the charts. And so what to be done? And now with the prospect of Chicago, city proper, legalizing this, and you know, the questions are, what about public safety implications there? And I reached out to Mayor Johnson's people, and they actually did respond that there are concerns. Of course, he's been a little ginchy about that, and also there's interplay with the casino that's being built, because there are fears by the casino operators, Bally's, that this would, if there are video gambling terminals, all the gas stations and bars and stuff, would cannibalize their revenues, and therefore maybe even taxpayer revenues that we're expected to get. But the bottom line is a lot of crime is surrounding these machines throughout the suburbs, south suburbs, west, north, all over.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge issue for the city to deal with. All right, well, Cardinal Blaise Cupich and his counterparts from D.C. and Newark, they issued a joint statement widely seen as a rebuke of the Trump administration, even though they didn't say the president's name, calling for a genuinely moral foreign policy for our nation. Bob, you've covered religion for a long time. Were you surprised by their move? No.
I mean, Cardinal Cupich is, well, first of all, you know, there's a few observations. First of all, some might observe that he doesn't even have his own house in order in Chicago in terms of the Catholic Church, which I've covered. He's been completely secret on the finances of the church, the whole sex abuse scandal, which I know he would like to put behind him, has never been fully, he's never been fully transparent about that and the full scope of that kind of issue. So that's one thing. The second thing is he has been he and some of the more progressive liberal clerics in the Catholic Church have leaned quite a bit more to the left and toward the Democrats. That being said, this issue, how the Trump administration is handling immigration and now war and aggression, is sort of in some ways uniting the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, but below the surface, it is just as split as, in some ways, as the rest of the country in terms of other social issues pertaining to, in particular, abortion and those kinds of things. So it's interesting, but I'm not sure fully what it means at this point.
All right, and we should note we will have the Cardinal on the program on Tuesday, so lots to ask him about. There might be a split in the church, but there's a unity at this table. We've got four great folks here, but unfortunately we are out of time. So our thanks to Michael Liptrot, Alice Yin, Robert Herguth, and Patrick Fingston. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Be sure to check out our website for the latest from WTTW News, including what to know about exploding trees, cold weather danger, or overblown hype. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. That's why I went to journalism school, to be able to say exploding trees on television.
I want to learn more.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, this cold's no joke. School districts were out today around the area. CPS canceled classes. Some of the other districts, they have to do remote learning. Not to sound like I'm standing on a soapbox and shaking my fist in the air, but can they just have the day off? Am I wrong here?
Our 4-year-old had preschool today.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm and sponsor of programming that offers continuing education to fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.